All right, good afternoon, guys. My name is Adam Cannon, and I'm going to be doing this presentation on construction and architecture development through from the beginning till present day. So there's a lot of eras that's consisted in the construction history. If you'll notice, there's several of these dates kind of overlap with each other, and we'll see this here later on when I go over each one of these. Some of these eras, derived from ideas of previous eras, leading to current day ideas. So we had the prehistoric times, which is from 11600 BCE to 3500 BCE. Ancient Egypt, which was 3050 BCE to 900 BCE. And then classical era, which was from 850 BCE to CE 476. So we started seeing more of the modern times during the classical era. We had the Byzantine era from 527 to 565, the Romanesque era from 800 to 1200, Gothic era 1100 to 1450, the famous Renaissance era from 1400 to 1600, the Baroque era from 1600 to 1830, the Rococo era from 1650 to 1790, Neoclassicism from 1730 to 1925, Art Nouveau from 1890 to 1914, the Beaux Arts from 1895 to 1925, Neo Gothic from 1905 to 1930, Art Deco from 1925 to 1937, and then your modernist styles from 1900 to present day. So first off, we have our prehistoric times, which was the first era. So prehistoric builders moved earth and stone into geometric forms, which created the earliest forms of man-made structures. So basically, you can think caveman styles. Anything that they could use, they used to make kinds of structures. This is seen mainly in areas of southern England that contains a lot of these well-preserved forms of prehistoric architecture. So one that a lot of people know is Stonehenge in Amesbury, which is pictured in this slide. Another one is Silbury Hill, which is considered the largest man-made prehistoric earthen mound in Europe. So this consisted, of soil, mud, and grass, with pits and tunnels of chalk and clay. So this is really just your bare minimum, basic earth materials was used during prehistoric times. So next, you have the ancient Egypt, which was from 3050 BCE to 900 BCE. So obviously, wood was not a very available material in Egypt, so these structures were made of blocks of sun-baked mud. Egypt is famous, for their pyramids of Giza. Brick and block mortar was not used during this time, so these blocks had to be precisely cut to fit together. And, just standard columns were used, to support loads because load bearing arches had not yet been developed. A lot of their designs, looked like plant forms, such as like palms and papyrus plants. And another thing that's, it's not written on this slide, it's kind of interesting. They, the technology, how they used to get these blocks, lifted and built these pyramids because they didn't have any kind of, manual cranes like we have in modern times. So this is really, some pretty impressive architecture for the time period that it was created in. So next up, we have the classical era, which this era often refers to the style and design of buildings in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. This basically started to shape the approach to building in Western colonies around the world. Looking at the Greek section of this, from around 700 to 323 BCE, the Doric column was first developed. This was used for a lot of their great temples. A famously known one was the Parthenon in Athens. In the Hellenistic area from 232 to 146, temples and buildings began using what they call an Ionic and Corinthian columns. And then we have the Romans, which is where a lot of these, they were known as great builders and things like that. So from 44 to 476, um, the Roman Empire started using more ornamented styles, such as the arches and domes, like we see in the Colosseum and the Pantheon. Part of the Colosseum is pictured on the left, and you can see how the different arches have been integrated into this structure. Next up, we have the Romanesque era, which from 800 to 1200. So this further expanded upon the Roman style of architecture. We started to see more like churches and castles that were considered like medieval. during this period. They had thicker walls and heavier pipes. So there's different structures. They had what they like a Gothic-like steeple, as you can see in this picture. They had a Latin cross floor plan, which also reflect the Gothic style as well. So pictured in the slide is an example of the traditional architecture in the Romanesque era. This is the Basilica of Saint Cyran in Talos, France. Um, this was, kind of established after the Roman Empire faded, but their ideas still continue to exist further past that era. So, following that era, we have the Gothic era. So, Gothic architecture become more characterized by elements that supported taller and more graceful architectures. So, you had different innovations such as, arches, flying buttresses, ribbed vaulting, stained glass, and the little gargoyles that you see on the outside of some of these buildings. Excuse me. So, some of the well-known buildings, on the left we have the Chartres Cathedral, and on the right we have the Notre Dame Cathedral in France. You can see how the pointed arches and all the different like textural designs started being integrated. And something we'll discuss a little bit later on is the Gothic revival, which can be seen in some areas of architecture in the 1800s and later. So now we have the Renaissance area, which was, a real artsy area. You have your famous Renaissance artists and such. This is known as the Age of Awakening. So we return to some of the ideas from the classical era that existed in Italy, France, and England. So pictured is an example of one of the villas, Villa Rotonda, near Venice, Italy, which Italian Renaissance master Andrea Pulido designed. He was an example of one of the architects during this era. So the Western world would find inspiration, with this type of architecture, and the U.S. would later recognize, the descendant designs of this as neoclassical, which is later on down the line of architecture. So next up, we'll kind of skip over the Baroque era because there's not a whole lot of difference between that and the Rococo era. The difference is the Rococo era used a more like graceful white building type of design, more pop and color and stuff like that. So their designs was usually, they contain patterns with like scrolls, vines, shell shapes, just and other geometric shapes that were similar to that. So on the bottom is pictured the 1750 Pilgrimage Church of Wise, which was an example of a building that would have been built during this era. And the picture on the top is an example of a building that would have been designed during the Baroque era. And as you can tell, there's a lot of difference between the two of them. But the Pilgrimage Church of Wise does have a little bit more of a lighter approach. So that was the major difference between these two eras. So we'll skip ahead a little bit more because these are the other eras in between this. They were not as significant. Most of them were, pretty similar. They just made some changes here and there. So the neoclassical era. So in the 1700s, European architects were turning away from these styles mentioned in the Baroque and Rococo. And this was due to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment presented a lot of new ideas for people, and it changed their perspectives on what they would want. Different classical ideas began to make a reappearance due to the French and American revolutions, and the United States started using these for construction of large government buildings, which the Capitol building is an example of that. And something that's not been mentioned yet is smaller private homes. So private homes has not really been mentioned yet because they were not quote per se, as popping as the main structures, such as these official buildings. Private homes, were still constructed, but we never started seeing a lot of integrated architectural design in homes until this era. Most of them were just your plain Jane, mud brick home or something like that. Um, so next we had the Neo-Gothic era. So this is where I mentioned before. This is where we see this Gothic revival. So again, with the great heights, arched pointed windows and gargoyles and other stuff like that, we started seeing these skyscrapers. Because the Gothic consisted of great heights in their buildings. So the 1924 Chicago Tribune Tower is an example of neo-Gothic architecture. And the cool thing about this building is the facade of the tower is actually studded with rocks that was collected from many great buildings around the world. So this really shows, um, this has been a preserved idea, and it really, puts emphasis on the fact that this is a revival of previous ideas, but yet it's in a more, modern sense. We're starting to adopt this in the present day. And then next you have your modern era, which is 1900s through present day. Modern styles are seen in almost everything that's constructed today. The difference is these older styles of buildings, they were known for how they looked. They had an appeal to the eye and everything, and they're cool to look at. But other than just simply existing, modern architecture, attempted to provide for like specific needs. So like in postmodernism, which started in the 70s, included like a large portion of like commercial buildings and just your standard residential homes or any other kind of a building, that serves a purpose. So you have commercial buildings, which include like stores, factories and, industries and stuff like that, things that people need to use, you go to the store and buy things. Um, Neo-modernism began in 1997, which is basically the era we are in now. So there's a significant reference that exists in neo-modernism, and so in the next slide there will be a picture. So the Moshe Safdie's 2011 Marina Bay Sands Resort in Singapore is going to be pictured on the left here, as you can see, and on the right is the prehistoric era Stonehenge. And as you can tell, the design between the two are very similar, and that shows, that prehistoric ideas are still being integrated into modern day society as we see it now. Um, so going on a little bit further, let's talk about some robotics. Now that we're talking about modern day architecture, robotics first made an appearance in construction in the 1960s. So the purpose of robotics, is to automate certain processes that are normally performed by, just regular workers. Um, Building modeling has aided in the process of making robotics more accessible due to AI and stuff like that, because building information modeling basically allows you to construct a structure, digitally and make it, available for people to see before it's actually constructed, and this, cuts down on cost and labor and, having to make change orders during the process of construction. It kind of supposed to be more efficient, but the obviously the startup process was slow because there was a lot of factors involved in this, including health and safety, and just automation, and this technology just provided to be expensive. So you have different types of construction robots. You have demolition, bricklaying, welding, drones. Those are pretty self-explanatory. The exoskeletons is a little bit different. They are literally a suit that or a suit-like structure that people can wear. It helps them increase their abilities. Per se, an Iron Man suit, if you would. It gets them more abilities, helps them with physical strength, endurance, and things like that. So uses is pretty self-explanatory. It allows workers to perform tasks, that from a safer distance, especially when it comes to demolition. It doesn't risk as much manpower. It helps delegate your people. You don't have as many people for certain tasks, and it allows you to save a little bit more money and increase productivity because, employees and workers, are required to have breaks. And these robots don't need that. And they are more efficient because they can work day and night and not, have any issues. Just have a push of a button and they'll do what they're programmed to do. And then again, you have the physical body structures, the exoskeletons, to increase employee abilities.